Welcome to the show, Purdeep Sangha. How you been?
I've been great, Jacqueline. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. No, it's my pleasure, man. So, what ignites you? What ignites your energy to do what you do on a daily basis?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing that ignites me is I'm a student. So every day I'm learning something. That's the biggest thing that gets me energized. So learning something new, growing as a result of that. But I do what I do because I have this deep desire to really try to do the best I can to contribute to this world. So my main motto is make this world a better place. So if I can do something little, something small every single day, then I'm doing my job. That's what gets me up and going. Aside from my family and my kids.
Yeah,
My kids
that's
are a big
awesome.
yeah, my kids are a big driving force for me right now. So they get me up, they get me energized. So being a better dad is something that I'm focused a lot on these days.
That's awesome. And how many kids you have?
I have two kids. I have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old.
A boy and girl, or
Boy and
two
girl.
boys?
Yep. Yep. No, boy and
Awesome.
girl. Got the best of both worlds. Yep.
That's awesome. That they're beautiful. Yeah, kids are amazing.
They
Oh,
are,
that's
absolutely.
great. So, before we get started and dive into your work and all that, could you share a bit about your background with the audience?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to make it as short as I can. But I grew up in a small town in Canada called Kelowna, and it was a great place to grow up. My parents were immigrants; they landed there, and I grew up in a very mindful environment. So Kelowna is kind of like the Napa Valley of Canada. So we have mountains, um, bigger mountains, I would say. We have wineries, we have vineyards, we have a freshwater lake, we have ski hills around. Like it's a pretty phenomenal place to grow up. Although when I grew up there, I didn't really realize how beautiful it was until I moved away.
Wow.
And I grew up on an orchard. That's essentially it. So before my parents bought their own orchard, I grew up as a little baby on an orchard because that's what my parents did for work. They did physical manual labor. And so it was a really interesting upbringing from that perspective because I grew up in a very mindful environment. So you talk about Vipassana, right? And how you went away.
Yeah.
That's a lot of my days were spent like that. I was just me and the trees and
Wow.
nobody else and no talking. So that's something that I think was very important for my upbringing. I grew up with a very spiritual grandfather. So my grandfather was a spiritual individual. His father, so my great grandfather, was a spiritual teacher in India for 65 plus years.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather was also in the military, so I grew up. Uh, he taught me a lot of principles about discipline and being a man of values and having principles, which was very important for that generation.
Yeah.
And then I had a father who was also a very masculine man, but a very open and emotional man. But he also struggled with alcoholism. So there was a whole bunch of dynamics in my upbringing. But fast forward, I was a student of business and I'm an entrepreneur right now. And my biggest passion and drive in terms of what I do is we help business professionals, whether you're an entrepreneur, an executive, a manager, whatever it may be, perform better in your life, both from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective. So I have a driving desire to help people perform better as parents, as spouses, as people in the community, as business leaders. And that's what I do day in and day out. Because when I was uh, first started off in this area, what I realized was I can help people perform better in business, but only to a certain degree because most of their personal challenges or their challenges are from personal stuff.
Right.
And so if we address the personal stuff, they can perform better in business. And a lot of those elements are based on my background in neuroscience and performance psychology. So for the last 35 or 32 years almost, I've been studying performance and really have spent a lot of time not only academically researching this, but that was part of our business, but understanding how humans operate, how we operate both in the business world and and the personal world, and really bringing that together to be able to help people what I call perform, achieve, and be fulfilled in every area of their life. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Nice, nice. Thank you for sharing that. And it's funny because I'm looking here at your certifications and you have so many different ones. And I'm like, how the hell has he found time to do all these? Because you have like, let me see, executive MBA in innovations leadership, certified innovation executive, certified lean black belt operations. I mean, you name it. You go and you have a neuroscience too. So it's so much. How did you find the time to do all this? I mean, you definitely have to be disciplined. That's
Ye-
number one, I think.
Yeah, I would say the one skill that I was taught as a young age, growing up in an orchard, was being timely, right, and getting up
Mm,
early and doing things that I needed to do. And my mom was very much a disciplined person, and so I thank her for that because I think this is something that's important for everybody, especially when it comes to performance, but also having a very good life. Because I learned this from my grandfather as well. So my grandfather was in the army, but here's a connection here between
hmm.
spirituality and practicality, right? And performing and just having the things that you want in life, but also being successful and happy and fulfilled. Is that even the most spiritual teachers are also the most disciplined people in life. They have the biggest structure,
That is true.
right? And so combining the two is what we call discipline. Actually leads to freedom. It's an old, actually ancient term that comes from yoga, which means to bind with. It's a Sanskrit root meaning yuj. Yuj means to bind with or to yoke with. So once you become one with the discipline, it's no longer a
Mm,
discipline. It's created freedom. For example, I don't have to have a discipline for working out. It's just part of who I am. I do it every single day. And if I don't do it, I don't feel like myself. So it's part of who I am. I don't think of it as a discipline. It's part of what I do on a daily routine. It's embedded in my life. So when you ask me how did I do all of this, is because I took those disciplines and embedded them into my life. Not that I'm a super structured person from the perspective of
right.
8 o'clock to 8:05 I'm brushing my teeth. It's I have a very structured way of doing things that allow me to do things faster, that then give me the time and freedom to still live life as well.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that because for a lot of people and myself included, I've struggled with, that discipline, with that structure because of, when I got sick and the things that has happened in the last few years to get back to that, structured environment or that disciplined life. It's hard. And that's why, like I shared with you earlier before getting on the podcast, I took that Vipassana, silent meditation for 10 days. And that was incredible because it taught me that discipline again. It kind of got
Yeah,
me back into that. And I was just like, oh my God, this is what was missing in my life. So I came back saying, you know what, I have to restructure the whole podcast. I got to do this, I got to do that. And my creative mind just got activated even more during that time. And I was just like, holy crap,
I
this is
bet.
so much needed, man. It is so
Yeah,
much needed.
clarity, right? This is the whole point of mindfulness, is emptying the mind, right? And so being fully
Yeah,
present. Most of us
exactly.
just don't have the capacity because we're so go, 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 go to be able to
Yeah.
reestablish. And so this is one of my main practices. Every Friday is my day. And
Okay.
every Friday, a big chunk of my morning, if not the entire morning, is recalibrating myself.
Okay.
So I go through and I take a look at where am I spending my energy, where am I spending my focus, my time, and my resources, and am I still in alignment with my goals and the life that I want? And that's my creativity period as well. So I take
Mm.
time, I create capacity for myself. And so a lot of us are missing out on that because we're just so busy doing so many different things.
Well, yeah, we've been so programmed to just go, 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 work and be in that rat race, all the time that we don't take time for ourselves, and God forbid we take a little bit of time for us, then we're called selfish, because
Yeah, yeah,
that's what I guess we've been programmed to think, if we just think about ourselves a little bit and, take that little bit of time to get ourselves centered, you know what I mean? So
yep,
we could be better for everybody else, right?
yep. Well, it depends
Yeah.
on what we're being selfish around. And I think this is a difference, right? The classic selfishness versus what is not selfish is self-care. So things
Mm-hmm.
like my family knows that eating healthy, for example, my workouts, I need to get that in there. They know that, my son will say, "Hey, look, can we play at this time?" I'm like, "No, I've got my workout." Right? And he knows that. And he's not
Mm.
he at first he questioned it to say, "Oh, well, does your workout more important than me?" I'm like, "No. It gives me
Oh.
the energy and drive to be able to be more present with you." Right? And so my son knows
Mm.
that's important part of my life. So I think it depends on what we are doing in terms of self-care versus selfishness, which I think are two different things, right?
They
If
are.
we are spending a lot of time sitting on social media and wasting our time for that perspective, that could be considered selfishness compared to
Mm.
being present with our kids. But if we're taking time for ourselves to go for a walk or even a pedicure or whatever it is, massage, or taking time out to spend with our friends because we need to recoup, that's okay. That's self-care. And that's
Right.
important.
It's funny we're in this subject right now because I was having a conversation with my son a little earlier, and he's a single dad. He's taking care of his oldest that's 8. Her mom passed away, and he's got the little one that comes every other week, and he has time with her now. But when I was at my Vipassana retreat, he was supposed to pick me up at day 11. And I got actually changed my mind because I felt like I don't know what integration is going to look like. I need to be, to think about myself a little bit more. I need to go home. Like I had that feeling that I just needed to come home. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I didn't know what everything else was going to look like. So I decided, you know what, I need to kind of like think about me. This is self-care. I need to think about my mental health. So I decided to come home, and he's been very upset at me ever since. And he's like, "You're so selfish. You chose yourself instead of choosing me and and your granddaughters." And I was just like, "Well, honey, I'm so sorry that you see it that way, but I have to think about my mental health too. I've done a lot of work, and I don't know what integration is going to look like." So I'm like, I feel you, I hear you, but I'm sorry that you perceive it that way, and it's so hard to kind of give him a different perspective because he is so, that one way. So how do you, in a situation like that, because I like to bring real life examples in a situation like that, what would you, let's say, I don't know, recommend to someone that is in that state of thinking that the other person is being selfish versus they're taking care of themselves?
Yeah, this is interesting. So this is your son?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. First of all, and you have a grandkid?
I have 2 grandkids from him and 8 other ones from my husband.
Holy crow! So first of all, I'm not even going to ask you how old you are because you don't look like you have grandkids. So that was a surprise to me when I heard that. I'm like, holy, you got grandkids.
Yeah.
In that kind of situation, I think the one thing that we need to understand, which is very important, is that it's not our job to make sure other people are okay all the time.
Mm.
So it's our job to ensure that we're communicating effectively. It's our job to make sure that we're not hurting other people. It's our job to make sure that what we are saying is being understood by the other person. But that doesn't mean that it's our job to make sure that they're okay. Because your son is no longer a child. He is a grown-up. He has his own feelings and emotional capacity and freedom. Children are a little bit different, right? And so if it's an 8-year-old, it's a little bit different because you're still taking care of them. You want to make sure that they're not feeling abandoned. But as grown adults, it's not our job to make sure that they're okay. We can have compassion for them. And that is a difference. Sometimes as parents, it's tough to do. But that is the best thing that we can do, right?
Yeah.
Because the rest of the world isn't going to make sure that they're okay all the time.
No, and I agree with you 100% because all the work that I've been doing, especially this last year and a half, is to detach from all the programming and all those things. And then he's coming at me as like he's an 8-year-old versus an adult. And he has all these expectations and all these things. And I'm like, well, honey, that is where the problem comes in. When you have expectations of whatever that, you're expecting from, let's say, me as your mom, you're going to fail. You're going to be hurt because I cannot always be there the way you want me to be there. I could be there as I can, depending on the circumstance of the situation, whatever it is. It's like I live 8 hours away. I cannot always get in a car and drive over there. I cannot always fly to you. There's circumstances, there's things that are involved. Therefore, I'm always here. He's like, yeah, but I need you here. And I was like, well, that's not realistic. You're an adult. I'm an adult. I have my life. You have yours. You chose your life. And all I can do is be here for you as you need me. I cannot intervene in your journey either. That's something that I had to learn, and it was hard because, moms, we're always wanting to help our kids and protect them and nourish them and stuff like that. But I've learned that he has his own journey, and whatever that is, I have to respect that and honor it, So it's a little difficult, because he doesn't get it. And he's studying psychology, and it's been over a year. And I would think, he will kind of like understand a little more. Yeah. But he's stuck in that mindset, that limited mindset.
Well, it's interesting you say psychology because there's even a lot of psychologists, for example, a lot of my colleagues. There's a difference between knowledge and understanding and application. And those are the differences, right?
Right.
And I'm going to use myself as an example, not because and for any particular reason, but I just know it because it's my experience,
Right.
right? So I had a different experience because I grew up through the world of spirituality, right?
Mm.
And so that gave me a different kind of knowledge, but I also had a very strong science background as well. So, but what I realize is that there's a lot of professionals out there, even particularly psychologists, that don't fully integrate and apply the knowledge themselves because
Right.
it's at a different level, right? It's almost at the true essence. If we take and break down psychology in its true essence, right, from philosophy, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it really comes down to the root of who we are as human beings and at the soul level. And that is greater than the psychological surface level, when we're talking about psychology as a
Right.
science, right? We're talking about the deep spirit. And that requires a lot of deep inner reflection. And sometimes it requires turmoil. Sometimes it requires suffering for us to
Yeah.
be able to go through that. Or going to, on a 10-day adventure of not, typically speaking to people on a regular basis and
Mm-hmm.
having, you sitting there with your own thoughts all the time.
Yeah.
So that's my reflection of it, is that, and it all comes back to being mindfully aware of who we are. So I think as children, it's really interesting. I can go on a complete tangent, but we are in a space and an environment today where more people are entitled or feeling entitled, and that is a bigger problem. And they're
Yeah.
not dealing with the adversity and the challenges that other people in previous generations did go through, that created character, that created true inner reflection. Because it's in
Mm-hmm.
times of tough challenges and suffering that people actually learn who they are.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. And that's one thing that I try to kind of talk to him about. I say, you're trying to talk about, past programmings and patterns and stuff like that. I said everything, a lot of it has to do with culture and upbringing.
Mhm.
Like my parents, for instance, I have a relationship with them. I cannot expect to have the kind of relationship I would love, because then that will be asking too much of them, where their mental capacity is not there. Their ability to comprehend or understand things at a different level is not there. So I've learned that, with my father, for instance, we have a relationship now. I realized that 3 years ago I wanted to forgive him for everything and not bring up the past, and just say, what, I just want a relationship with you, and we'll build it from here now. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. It's fine. Let's just build from now. Because if you keep on with the past and the past and the past, you're just going to be stuck there. Nothing's ever going to be resolved. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like you got to kind of meet them where they're at, but without losing yourself either.
Exactly. Because everybody, the old saying is you do have to meet them where they're at, because everybody's on a different journey and it's a different path.
Yeah, yeah,
And so,
yeah,
you might, and very seldom, and this is what with the concept of soulmates, do you meet someone and intersect on a path and continue on the same path together,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because everybody has their own destiny.
Everybody has their own, and my husband and I, we have our own individual journeys. And at the beginning of the relationship, it wasn't like, butterflies and beautiful things. We went through a lot to get to where we're
Mm.
at right now, to have the relationship that we're starting to have. We struggled because we both came from a lot of traumas and a lot of mental health things, and being closed off, and a lot of narcissistic tendencies
Mm.
and stuff like that. And we've had to do a lot of inner work ourselves, and to the point where now he looks at me, he's like, wow, like, you have changed so much. I see your growth. And I said, I see yours too. And somehow along the way of doing my inner work, I've inspired him to now want to go and do the 10-day silent retreat, because he's seen the change. He's seen it. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, you know what? I don't push anything on anyone. That's not my intentions. I just want to do my inner work, radiate love, because that's what, at the end of the day, what everything is. It's just love. That's what Jesus's teachings were, Buddha's, everybody, all the ascended masters, they were just trying to teach love
Mhm.
at the end of the day, you
Yep.
know? Yep.
That's what it's about, love
So
and compassion.
love and compassion. Yeah. So it's funny. I love where this conversation has gone so far, because it's real life stuff. And,
Mhm.
what would you recommend to me in this avenue right now with my son? Like, how would I be able to kind of just handle him not being able to see anything that in a better light. Everything's always so dense and dark and limited, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a tough one because my son's
Yeah.
11 years old and he's grown up with me. But my son, I'll give you, and I'm sharing this because we're both talking about our sons,
Yeah.
is external influences in my life that have influenced my son have not been very good
Okay.
because so we have extended family, for example, and I can share this openly, like from an in-law perspective, that have had negative influences that I have to counter all the time. And
Mm,
he's particularly susceptible to it because he's still 11 years old, right? Your son
right.
is an adult, so it's a little bit different. In
Right.
this case, though, when you're talking about your son, the one thing, and there's an old saying that I came across where it said, "Your children are not yours. You are a
Mm-hmm.
vessel that opened up their ability to come into this world."
Yep.
Right. And so you nurture them to a
Yep.
certain point, and then their destiny is their destiny. You can support them, you can guide them, but they're on their own learning path. And the best way that I think anybody can teach somebody else is through examples and mentorship. That's the best way.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do with my son, for example, is I just have to be the best mentor that I can be and live
Okay.
out specific ways that I want my son to pick up on. Because here's another old saying: you can't be you can't be a preacher in your own land, is what they say. Because in
That
your
is
own
true.
land, you've grown up, let's just say, not being a preacher and then a preacher. No one looks at you the same way, right? You're still that same old person, but you go to a different land and they're going to see you just as a preacher because they don't know your previous history. So as a dad, even with all my skill sets, for example, I am still a dad to my kid.
Right.
And so he's not going to see me for my expertise. And so I just have to be a dad, which is just being a mentor. So what I do with my son is yesterday I did it with him and I said, "Hey, look, if you watch this YouTube video with me, I'll give you some extra computer time." It's a
Mm.
different approach. But
Yeah.
it was a video on mindfulness and a manifestation, but also from a self-esteem perspective and a whole lot of other things. Because I know he will take more from this message from somebody else than
Mm.
he will from me. So the best way to
Okay.
educate somebody as a parent is not necessarily as a parent,
Hmm.
and is to provide them resources from somebody else because they can hear it from a non-parent and they might be more open to it. So being a mentor, right, living a life that you want to live and being a good example is one way, but then also
Okay.
sharing resources is another way, because training is one way, or education is the best way to help someone change their behavior, but it might not be your way in terms
Mm.
of your education that
Right.
teaches them to do something differently. It
Yeah.
most likely is education for somebody else.
See, and that's where the challenge is because of the limited mindset. He's like, he doesn't want me to share things with him. He wants me to
Hmm.
share from my perspective, which I learned to do. But then
Mm.
he's like, well, that's your journey and you did
Yeah.
that. That's not for me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, who says that it's not for you? Have you experienced it? Have you given it a try? He's like, well, I just know that it's not for me. And I'm just like, okay. Like, how do, because I don't want to push anything on him. I don't want him to feel like, oh, this is the way and the only way. That's not what I'm trying to come across as. I'm trying to also lead by example by me doing my work. But it's so hard because sometimes I want to share something and he just won't listen to it. He won't even open up a video. He won't do any of that. And I'm just like, well, how can I really guide you if you're not even allowing me to?
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes down to what you believe your role is as a mother now.
Yeah.
Because your role as a mother, so when we are to a certain age, for example, right, ideally this is our role as parents. We love our
Right.
kids, we protect our kids, right, we nurture our kids, we provide for our kids,
Mm-hmm.
and we teach our kids, right? And so those
Yeah.
are different roles as parents, and then we become a good example, a mentor for our kids. But the
Right.
thing is, those shift as we get older. You're no longer the caretaker. You're no longer the provider, right? Or the
Right.
protector. You can still be there to provide love. And it's no longer about teaching if they're not susceptible. It's about love and being a mentor. So
Mm.
and when I say mentorship through living by example.
Okay.
So in that instance, for example, you may not even want to send anything. Just live the life that you want to live and be a good
Mm.
example and continue to love them and continue to show compassion because, and this is a spiritual principle. This isn't,
Yeah.
it's a challenge for us because it depends on what we believe in as well. And here's my personal belief: we are all here for two particular. Well, we are here to experience life and be our best version of ourselves and experience life. It's meant to be joyful, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
one thing. But also contribute to other people's well-being, but also learn as an individual, learn as a
Right.
soul. But everybody's soul is at a different stage in life. Everybody's soul learns at a different pace. So there are people that have an older soul, and there are
Mm-hmm.
people that have a younger, more naive soul. And
Right.
it's not our place to try to direct that journey for that person. So I'm not
That is
saying
true.
this it depends on what you believe in, but
Mm-hmm.
um,
I'm right there with you. I understand all that. These have been all my teachings for the last year and a half, and just kind of like not just the teachings. It's become, like something that I've always known inside of me,
mm,
and it's just become that confirmation because I'm an
yeah,
old soul. Like I've lived so many timelines, so many different ones. I've gone through so many different things, but for me it's like, it's challenging when he's like, I just want you to be my mom, and I'm just like, well, what does that look like for you? And when he tells me, it's like an 8-year-old, and I'm
yeah,
just like, well, honey, I can't be that mom because we're past that stage. You know what I mean? It's like we could build a relationship now because we've had, things happen, throughout our
mm,
lives together and stuff. So I'm like, right now, there's no point of keep reliving, childhood traumas and all these things. We could talk about it, but at the end of the day, we have to release all those traumas and try to start here. Let's build a new relationship. Let's get to know each other now, because we're both changing. I've changed, you've changed. We're not the same people,
hmm.
but it's just so challenging because in his mind it's just like, I want my mom, and
How
I'm
old
just
is your
like, well,
son?
I don't know what that looks like for him.
How old is your mom? Or
I'm
sorry, your
sorry.
mom, your son. How old is your son?
He's about to be 30 in April.
Okay, so 30. Way past that age. So
Yeah.
he's at a level where if so there's there's a cognitive level, there's the emotional level, there's a physical level, and then there's a spiritual level, right?
Okay.
So obviously that evolution is different for different people. He's reached the 30-year-old physical level and maybe even cognitive level, but the emotional level and the spiritual level haven't
He
been there.
hasn't.
So that's where the challenge comes in. It can be tough as a mother, but again, it's not your job at this particular stage. Your job is just to
Okay.
love him, is just to love him and provide that love for him. If he's looking for other things, he's going to have to find those other things from somewhere else. He may find it. Is there a woman in his life?
Not at the moment.
Okay,
No, she left
so
a
he,
year ago.
so
Over a
he,
year ago.
so
Yeah.
I don't know the dynamics of your son. This is just what I'm just gonna throw a dart out there. But in those
Yeah.
types of dynamics, for example, men that are at 30 years old that are looking for a mother, he will probably look for that in a significant other. And then at some point, she'll probably be tired of it being his mother.
That's
And
what
then there's going
happened.
yeah, and then there's going to be frustration and relationships
Yeah.
fall apart. So he really has to mature, and so that may require him to have some independent time with himself and grow and just go through those tough times. Unfortunately, some people um, they may just not get to that stage. And
Yeah.
there's
I,
been people in
I
my
have
life.
faith that he will. I have faith that he will
Yeah,
because he's my son, and
yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
like those, I believe that my work and the energies, radiate out, and eventually
Hmm.
he'll kind of get that. I have that really that hope and that faith that will happen. And he's very spiritual. He's just a little too closed off. But it's like even when I got back that first night from Vipassana, he was so upset that he's like, I don't want you in my life anymore. You could be in your granddaughter's life, but I don't want you in my life. And I said, well, is that going to make you happy? I went back to Buddha. Just be happy. If that's going to make you 100% happy, I will take that. Okay. I was so at ease. I mean, after 10 days of not dealing with it, just myself, I was so
Yeah.
at ease. And I was just able to just be like, okay, I love you. Whatever you
Hmm.
need. If you don't want to talk to me, if you're in this space right now, hey, I will respect that. And for him, it's like he kept on going on that little circle of like the same thing. And I was like, honey, at the end of the day, you could keep going through the same, whatever you're saying, but at the end of the day, it's your decision, and I will love you. And when you're ready, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm your
Yeah.
mother, you know?
Yeah.
So went through that, and then he found excuses to call me. And then finally he's been talking to another girl for a while. And she was like, well, if I'm going to be in your life, you need to have a relationship with your mother. And I was like, that's a good one right there. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Exactly. Good advice.
Good advice. So that's where we're at. We're working through those things, but it's just so funny that, after going through all these experiences, I'm just so at peace. I understand. Like I get it, and I have that strong belief that I know I'm on the right path. I've had tons of confirmations, and even if he doesn't feel that I'm connected to him or that I'm not his mother or whatever he's going through, it's all just the mind,
Yes.
because it boils down to the mind and matter, like, what I learned in Vipassana, what you've learned through neuroscience and all that, science and spirituality, it's intertwined. It's all
Hmm.
together, you
Yep.
know?
Yep. Very much so.
Yeah, yeah. So that's funny. So let's jump into your work. And can you emphasize a little bit about the science of self-mastery? Can you explain a little bit what that means essentially for success?
Yeah. Wow. That's a big topic. So it depends on where we start, right? So fundamentally, science helps us understand ourselves a little bit better. That's
Okay.
essentially it. Like, why do I
Mhm.
have these thoughts? Or why do I have these emotions? Or why, when I'm in this interaction with somebody else, does this always end up happening? So, science is a mechanism of explanation, right? So, that's essentially where science comes in. And we use science from a perspective of to educate people so that they have an understanding.
Okay.
And so psychology, so this is where the practical elements are. And I'm just going to try to simplify this. Understanding your brain is great, right? Because if you know that your amygdala does this, your thalamus does this, there are different parts of your brain do this, and you have different neurochemicals, great. But does that help you change your behavior? Not really.
Not
That's
really.
that's where the psychology comes in, right? Understanding your mind and how to shift your mind. So there's different layers. Neuroscience is at the underlying layer, then you're at the psychology level. And so when you understand both elements, then it's easier to say, oh, that's why I keep thinking this way, or that's why I keep, having these thoughts that come up all the time. So you're not beating yourself up. It's a greater level of awareness, right?
Right.
So that's where we use science to really help people understand their own behavior and understand how they can shift their behavior. So that's the core element of it. So, for example, when someone is uh, especially these days, a lot of people are having trouble being focused. It's a very
Yeah.
common challenge. We've always had this challenge as human species, but I wouldn't say it's a challenge. In the past, it wasn't a challenge because our mind is designed to drift off and
Right.
daydream, right? It's called the default mode network. And it's designed to do that a certain amount of period of time. However, what we found now, and it's not our studies, we're using other people's studies on this and we're identifying them and using it into practicality, though our ability to focus has been diminished from the perspective of we are no longer able to focus on the things we should be focusing on, uh, and need to be that are beneficial to us. We are focused on things that don't really mean anything, like our smartphones and social media
Yeah.
and distractions. And particularly today, while we're recording this episode, right, it's the American political, it's election day, and media
Yeah.
is going crazy right now. And so that's what we are being distracted. So when we show people, because people are having a tough time with this, like
Yeah.
literally, they are having a trouble focusing. So if you have trouble focusing, what does that do to your productivity? What does it do to your performance? What does it do for your ability to be present? And if you can't be present, you can't be effective and you can't have deep relationships. So that's
That's
where the
true.
science element comes in, right? When we start talking about why technology impacts you a certain way and why it's important for you to do things. It's, for example, it's very similar to smoking, right? People weren't really aware how bad smoking was until science came out. And even then, people still continue to smoke, but it kills you, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
kills you.
I was a
And
smoker until almost 4 years ago. And then I literally said, if I keep smoking, I'm going to die. There was
yeah,
an awareness that came in, like a download or something, and I was like, I'm done. And now I smell it. I'm like, the hell was I thinking? It was the
yeah,
programming.
it's the programming, right? And so this is why
Yeah.
it's so important. It's we just got to reprogram ourselves. And it's for me, it's very simple. I try to simplify it as much as possible
Hmm.
because it's not good or bad. It's either healthy or unhealthy. That's it.
That's it.
So
Yeah.
eating habits, either healthy or unhealthy. Relationship habits, either healthy or unhealthy, right? Business habits, healthy or unhealthy. So there's just those two categories, and it's easier for people to understand that. And science can show that, right?
Yeah.
It's healthier to give someone a hug than to be mad at someone. Biologically, it's healthier
Yeah.
because you have better you have oxytocin, for example, that comes in your body when you hug someone versus getting mad, which is cortisol. And when
Mm-hmm.
I explain that to someone and say the more angry you feel, you're actually basically degrading your cells in your physiology, which ultimately hurts you. People are like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like, so it's just an awareness piece from that perspective. And we use science in terms of our systems and our programs when we help to educate people and train people, because the science is continuously changing, right? What we thought was what was right 100 years ago is not the same thing today. Like
No.
30, 40 years ago, people thought that the brain was fixed and you couldn't really change things. Well, then neuroplasticity came into the picture, where now you can actually shift how your brain is wired to a certain degree. People thought
Right.
genes were fixed, but now there's epigenetics, which is you can influence your genes by your environment and even your thinking and your emotions.
Oh
So
yeah.
these are the different elements of science that we incorporated into our work.
Yeah, you could make yourself sick. You can make
Hmm.
yourself healthy. You can heal your own self. We were designed to heal ourselves.
Yes.
We just got away from that and everything's always outside of us. So yeah, it's fascinating. I love science. I've always have. And when I've learned that science and spirituality, it's all linked. And it's just kind of gave me this feeling of like peace inside of me. Because that's one
Yeah.
of the things that I was learning in Vipassana, where they talked about, like, adding more aversions on top of aversions and more misery on top of misery, where we have the ability to not do that, do the
Yeah.
opposite.
Just
We
let it
have a
go.
choice. Yeah, just let it go. And some people are like, well, it's easier said than done. And I'm like, well, it's not about easy, it's about putting it into practice. And what do you prefer, being happy or being right about things?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I've chosen, I'd rather be happy now than being miserable.
Yep.
I know there's another way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And so why? Yeah, we're trained because we've been habitualized into feeling a certain way. That's
Yeah.
that's basically it. It's our habits and our neural programming that we continue to operate a certain way until something breaks it, whether it's an experience, a life circumstance, a change.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's someone passing away
Yeah.
that
It's
causes
like
it, forces us.
yeah, they were talking about unconscious and conscious. And I remember Cuenca was saying, the teacher, well, the unconscious mind is really not conscious. It's not really unconscious. It's actually conscious.
Hmm.
It's always conscious. And I was just like, it makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, the unconscious mind is always there,
Yeah,
right? We are
always.
just not fully aware of it until we bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, we're the ones that are not conscious. The
Yeah.
unconscious is conscious
Yeah,
and aware.
the mind is so powerful. I think this is something that's very, very
Yeah.
important. It is so powerful because our mind picks up on things that our unconscious mind picks up on things that our conscious mind, we're just distracted, right? And so this
Hmm.
is where hunches come in, intuitions come in, gut feelings come in, because our brain is trying to, unconscious mind is telling us things that we need to take into consideration. I think that's very important. And you mentioned something that's, yeah, science and spirituality, they're very much intertwined. And
Yeah.
and for the simplest example, which is one of the most profound examples, is the impact of meditation and how that
Mm.
changes brain anatomy and physiology. And so, people have been talking about this or doing these practice for thousands of years, but now within the last 50 years, science is starting to show, particularly in the last 20 years, the true impact of meditation.
Yeah.
And so it's a pretty amazing time to live in, because I think in the next 10, 20 years we're going to see some more fascinating studies come out.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with Billy Carlson, but he talks about a lot of that, and he literally, I just heard one of his TikToks, and he was talking about how, like, the science and the spirituality, basically the science is telling you what spirituality is, and the different levels and the
Mm,
different things, and how everything is intertwined and interconnected and all these things. And I was just like, thank you, Billy, because a lot of people don't know that. We were not really taught that science
yeah.
and spirituality it's together. Is Everything's always been so separate. And I tell my son that now. I said, Richard, everything is spiritual. And he's like, no, it's not. And I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna argue with you.
Yeah.
I know that. I understand that at a different level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you take a look at, for example, Einstein, right, which is he's probably the
Mm-hmm.
most well-known, you can say, scientist out there. But
Yeah.
what he talked about was profound, and one of his sayings, or one of his quotes is, "Everything is energy, and it's as simple as that." And that's what
Yeah.
it is. If you take a look at quantum physics, for example, that's what we're getting into, right? Physics,
Yeah.
quantum
Yeah.
physics in particular, and spirituality. The physicists they know, they're like, this world is a bunch of energy and matter and dark matter and a whole bunch of stuff we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in the same realm of spirituality. Is it possible, for example, for someone across the world to have or be some kind of a connection? Quantum physics says, yeah, there absolutely can be.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
and so why wouldn't we believe in that? Because it's tough to believe in sometimes. Because all the challenges that we have in life.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's funny. What was it? A few days ago, I'm at home and my husband went to Walmart and he calls me his little woman. That I've gone from mamitis to all kinds of different names throughout the 7 years we've been together. And the one that is stuck has been my little woman. He just loves calling me that. And I'm here at the house and just going through my integration, and all of a sudden I heard him. And he was thinking about me and he was calling me his little woman in his mind at Walmart, and I heard him from my left ear, like if he was right downstairs outside, like he just got home. And I answered him, and then I was like, I went and looked for the car. I'm like, oh my God, he's not even here. So I looked
Is
at,
a-
his location. I'm like, oh my God, he's at Walmart. I just literally heard him. So I called him and I said, hey, were you thinking about me? Did you say my little woman anything? He's like, yeah, I just literally was calling you my little woman because I was thinking about you. And I
oh,
said, I heard you through my left ear as clear as if you were right downstairs.
wow.
It was
Yeah,
like
that's
the
profound.
most amazing thing. And I'm like, see, we're connected. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, where you're at. If you connect to your higher self, to I believe
Yep.
this, to your spirit guides, to all this, the universe, everything, you could connect to other people, other beings, anywhere.
Oh
I
yeah,
believe in that.
I believe in that too. And I'm just going to share some personal experience because some people might think
Sure.
this is weird. But this is where, my grandfather taught me meditation when I was like 8 years old, 9 years old. And I started to read on brain science back when I was 11 years old, 12 years old. So
Wow.
it was two different worlds. So my grandfather taught me from the spiritual perspective. I it just happened by fluke had an interest in brain science. So I started to research. And what I came to was I realized that, wow, the profound impacts of meditation and what would happen as a result of meditation and visualization, for example. And I
Mm,
was able to do things that other kids were not able to do, not because I was gifted, but I was able to tap into something that we all have the ability to tap into,
yeah.
whether it's a universal genius or whatever that might be. Like in school, uh, I was able to solve problems and memorize things. I had a photographic memory. I could
Mm,
memorize a 500-page textbook word for word. And
yeah.
a lot of kids were like, that's not normal. But it is normal for us if we actually tap into that ability. And so I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough, I would say my path, I was privileged to be able to fall into this, to learn it at a young age in terms of the power that our mind and spirit has. And everybody has the ability to do this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this isn't something, it's not a gift, it's everybody has this innate ability. The thing that stops us is really we're just too busy, life hits us, we're in an environment where the other people don't pay attention to this, and then we, on the far extreme ends too, we just have a whole bunch of people that are just, from my perspective, sharing a whole bunch of stuff that's false.
Yeah.
Like, and it gives a bad taste to this world of spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a massive misconception with so many different things in this world. So it's a combination of number of factors. But I think the beauty is that everybody has this ability, and everybody at some
Mm-hmm.
point in time will be ready to tap into this, whether it's early in the years, later on, perhaps in their next lifetime. But we all have that ability.
Yeah. I think the earth is shifting, everything is shifting. Even this whole spirituality, it's opening up more and more. There's more. I'm seeing more awareness, more consciousness. I'm seeing more of like people that are connecting, like channels and psychics and all these other people that have these abilities. We all have it. We all have the ability to connect, to get downloads, to whatever, what I mean, to become healers, light workers, whatever you want to call it. We're able, I mean, there's no limitations to what we can do, because we are God's source universe. We were created by him
Yeah.
in his image. And that's what that means to me, that we have that ability to create anything and do anything. No, there's no sky's the limit. I hate that saying now. Before I used
Yeah.
to be like, sky's the limit. And I'm like, no, it's not. There's no
Yeah.
limit to what we can do if we tap into things, if we actually
Yes.
allow ourselves to do that.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I went from making myself extremely sick, especially through a car accident that nearly killed my husband and I, and we lost our dog, to losing my grandmother and going to a severe depression, to my body like getting really sick, my mental, everything, to making a decision. I want to get healthy, and I'm going to do it naturally, and I'm going to do it myself. And I did. In a year and a half, I'm nowhere where I used to be. I mean, I was at a point where I wanted to die every day. You know what I mean? I just didn't have the mental capacity to understand anything, worse than my son. You know what I mean? But I made a decision, and I've learned, and I tapped into things, and I came across things that I was just like, oh my God, I could actually heal myself. I can actually do these things. And there's no limit. I've realized that, and I love the fact that we're in this space now, that there's so many people coming out with their gifts, their things, and it's just amazing. I'm like, finally, I'm happy because we're all playing, we're starting to play in this beautiful garden, and realizing things. And, eventually I have faith that humanity is going to shift,
Yeah.
I have that faith. I think we're going in the right direction, and there's got to be that chaos, and there's got to be certain things that's got to happen, because, you have to kind of like disrupt the old patterns and the old programming so we can create new stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I know we've gone through different, topics here, but what I wanted to ask you, what is the most common challenges men face today when they're trying to balance their personal growth with their business ambitions?
Yeah, it's oh wow, there's the biggest challenge, I think one of them is trying to do it themselves. So in order to have success in any aspect, whether it's a professional life or personal life, you have to have the right people around you and have a team. So
Right.
is that team at home effective? So are you and your spouse effective as a team, and especially with your kids? Because if that's not effective, you're going to be challenged there. And that's one of the biggest common challenges
Yeah.
for men, is not having the relationship that they want. And then on the professional side, making sure that they have good people there. On the professional side, to work together as a team, men tend to try to do things alone, right? Because we're kind of trained that way, we're taught that way. It's also a rite of passage as well, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because I think there used to be traditions and rituals that used to take a young boy in teenage years and go through a ritual where they would become a man. Now, I don't agree with a lot of the rituals
Right.
that some cultures used, but it was a rite of passage. And I think that, for example, it's a switch when we talk about, for your son in particular, what was his rite of passage for him to transition into a man? He never went through that. That's why he's still
Well,
behaving that way.
it's funny because he went through the military, which I thought it would be that transition, but it became the opposite. You know what I mean? For him, it's the weirdest thing. 7 years in the Navy, and you would think, right?
That's really interesting, and I would love to get into that a little bit more. But that's a really interesting
Yeah.
dynamic, because typically that is a rite of passage. But I'm not going to say, and this is really interesting, because the military isn't always a healthy environment. So there's a
No.
difference there, right? And so you would hope that someone going through that process would end up being more mature, but a lot of people come out more traumatized.
He is in certain areas, like he owns
Yep.
his own home, he takes care of his daughters, like, he's a single dad. Like, there's certain things that he's I've seen him mature throughout the years, but then there's that I need my mommy.
Yeah. And that's what
that
we talk.
part.
Like I said, right? There's maturity at physical, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual, right? And so the biggest thing, this is what we have really missed out on, is what is that level of emotional maturity amongst people, not just your son, just in general. And that
Exactly.
that emotional maturity, someone can mature cognitively, but they don't mature emotionally, and that
Mm,
is the challenge. So whatever situation he was in through the Navy, it seems
yeah.
like either he did mature emotionally, or and then he reverted based on some kind of circumstances or trauma or
Yeah,
situation.
he's got some PTSD. He got out
Okay,
on full disability and,
okay.
some traumas and
So
stuff.
that in itself will tell you
Mm,
exactly what it is, right? Or I
okay.
shouldn't say that, not exactly what it is. But think about it. When someone goes through trauma, they want someone to protect them, to take care of them, right? And that is
Mm,
an emotional thing. It's not cognitive. And we are emotional beings. By
yeah.
far, we are emotional beings. So if we haven't mastered our ability, or we haven't become masters of our emotions
Mm,
take over. And mastering our
yeah.
emotions, I'm telling you, is one of the most difficult things in life.
You talk
If
about that emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I've
Well,
read that. Yeah.
it's beyond emotional intelligence. It's
Okay.
emotional mastery, which is
Mm,
the practical, you can say, mastery of your emotions. And that requires a lot of experience. And I'm telling you, within myself,
right.
that every day I'm learning myself, right? And I'm 45
Yeah.
years old, and I've been trained in this area, and I'm still learning how to master my emotions. And so
Mm,
it is an ongoing process. It's one of the
yeah.
most toughest things. So I feel for people. This is when we talk about
Yeah.
cultures, whether it's Buddhism or any type of Taoism. We have to give people compassion, because
Mm,
being able to master our emotions is one of the toughest challenges in life. And
yeah.
most people haven't understood that or grasped that. So I can understand where your son is coming from now that
Yeah.
you have told me that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely could relate and understand him because I look at him and where he's at in his space, and I'm like, I know exactly where he's at. I was there. I've been there. You know what I mean? So I can understand, and then I have my compassion for him, but I feel that I cannot just enable whatever the behavior or the
No.
circumstance is. So there's that. It's hard to find that balance sometimes because you want to be there for them, you want to be their mom, you want to, you know what I mean, but then you
Yeah.
cannot lose the reality of what you already know and you've experienced, because then you're enabling them, so then you're not helping them.
Yeah. And I
So it's a
think this
fine
is,
line.
no, there is
Yeah.
a fine line, and I have a bone to pick and a beef to pick with military, because this is something that they need to equip people before you. There's a high chance that if someone goes into the military, they're going to end up with some kind of post traumatic
Yep.
challenge, especially if they go to war, right? They are going.
100%.
So what are they equipping them with? What are the tools that they are equipping them with to be able to get through those challenges? Now, there's a great show um, on not Netflix, but Apple TV. It's called Shrinking,
Hmm. Okay.
with Harrison Ford. And it's, as you're talking about this is exactly one of the key
Mm,
characters in there. A young man who comes back from the military, and he has PTSD. And Shrinking is all about, there's three psychologists. That's the main storyline, right? And
right.
one of the psychologists took this young man on as a patient or as a client, and trying to help him through his PTSD. But this is exactly what we are talking about in terms of allowing that person to face their challenges, and they have to face it and go through those challenges. It's
Right.
not our job to get them through that. It's our job to support them as they get through that. And
Right.
so this is it's a really interesting area from if someone can learn how to master their emotions, they pretty much can master anything
Yeah.
fundamentally.
Yeah. And that is very challenging. I know because I've
Yeah.
been dealing with it for all this time. And I'm like, finally, I'm getting to that mastery of my emotional intelligence. It's like really understanding things. Because even like right before we jumped on the podcast, I'm like, having my conversation with him, I had to stop, did my 10-minute anapana, breathing meditation, and get myself back to center, and having that intelligence, that emotional intelligence to say,
Yeah.
I can't fall into that emotion of whatever I'm feeling right now, because it's not going to serve me in any way. I'm not going to be good in nothing that I do. Like right now with you in the podcast, I would have been a total mess before, if I wouldn't have these
Mm,
techniques that I have now, in the intelligence in the awareness, to say, oh, wait a second, let me go to my meditation chair, my little space. Let me meditate. Let me just kind of like dissolve all these feelings, because at the end of the day, we're human beings.
yeah.
We're still
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
have all these things, and not add any more aversions and misery and stuff, to the situation, to my life, and just see it as what it is. He's in a different space, and
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
okay. It's
Yep.
perfect. I think it's amazing where he's at, because that means that he's on that. But I see it as he's in that growth journey, and he doesn't even know it.
Well, I
All
think
of it is part of it.
we're all on a growth journey. We're on different stages or paths. I think ultimately, and
Exactly.
I think it's not even stages, it's paths, because we all have different
Exactly.
paths. And that's the thing, right? We just got to understand that and continue to nurture the individuals. But coming back to this conversation around emotional mastery, that is
Mm-hmm.
the most powerful thing and fundamental thing that we can do as human beings
Mm-hmm.
is learn how to master our emotions, because not only does it allow us to live life to a better degree, but
Right.
it's better for our children. The number one thing that we can teach our children is modeling how to manage our emotions.
Mm.
And so this is why
I,
for me, for my kids, it's a number one thing. I'm trying to teach them how to manage their emotions. I'm not trying to teach them, um, how to make more money. I'm not trying to teach them technology. I'm not trying to teach them anything else. I'm trying to teach them how, if they can manage their emotions, if they can be aware of their emotions, learn how to connect with their emotions and not to avoid their emotions or lock their emotions away, and
mm-hmm.
know how to shift their own emotions. And instead of someone else being able to shift their emotions, they're going to be okay in life, regardless
Yeah.
of what happens. But it's not easy, right?
No, it's
As a
not.
parent, it's not easy.
It's not. The good thing is that you have probably even better insights that your parents did and your grandparents. I know I do. I know my son is starting to have a little bit more, because I see it. I see it in him not giving up on his kids, and him doing,
Mm.
like sacrificing and all these things, which was very different for me because I had him at 17. So it was
Mm.
like I struggled with a lot of things, him growing up, and a lot of
Wow.
different decisions that were made that I thought were sacrificed, that I thought were for his better being, and ended up probably not being for his better being at the end
Yep.
of the day, the
Yep.
way that I could see it now. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But I think everything in life is just a journey, and we're all meant to go through whatever we're supposed to and be students, learn. Every day we're learning something,
Yep.
every freaking day. And I
That's
love it. I
yeah.
you see I got these books back here. I've done nothing but read this past year and a half. It's been like I've gone through, I think, over 20 books lately.
Oh, awesome. Good for you.
Yeah, and I could never sit down in my whole life. I think I read like 2 books in my whole life before this. And I'm just like, it makes total sense that if you have that emotional intelligence, that clarity, if you're healthier, you're able to do so much more and
Yep.
actually, contribute as a human to the society even more.
Yep. Completely agree.
Cool. So let's shift into your book. Talk to me a little bit about, your book, about the complete man. What can readers take away from it?
The Complete Man was something I wrote in 2020 because it was a time that I thought was appropriate to write the book. So 2020, COVID happened, there was lockdown, people were starting to
Mm-hmm.
lose their jobs. And I made a conscious effort at that time. I said, hey, look, okay, understanding men, because we did a lot of research with men. And it's near and dear to my heart because, as I mentioned before, my dad was an entrepreneur, but also struggled with alcoholism. So that was my impetus, right? I really studied my dad at a very young age because I was always trying to figure
Right.
out when he would drink, how much he would drink, what set him off. Because when he drank too much, he was a completely different man, and he was a big man.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he was thrown off, it was like a bomb went off in the house. So that's where I started to study this area of men in particular, and men and relationships, and men and women in relationships, and you can say this concept of gender roles and so forth. Because I grew up in a traditional Indian household, and it worked for us. Like outside of my
Right.
dad's drinking, we were a functional family, right? I'm not going to downplay my dad's drinking because that was very dysfunctional and had a big toll on our family. But outside of that, we were a functional family, right? We worked well together. We had a healthy life
Right.
outside of that. And part of that was also traditional gender roles, right? My mom doing
Mm.
specific things, my dad doing specific things. They knew that. They worked together as a team and a good team. And my brother and I growing up in that environment. So I had a very deep understanding of men. And then the research and psychology behind how we operate in our belief systems. And so I took all of that and the work that I did in working with men and men's leadership in particular, and put that into the Complete Man because I wanted men to have a tool or some knowledge to be able to get through COVID, because COVID was so challenging, in particular for men.
Yeah.
because people were losing their jobs or their businesses. And we know that men, first of all, identify to a higher degree to their jobs and their profession in terms of their identity. That's a big part of who they are. So if they lose their job, they lose themselves. And if they lose themselves, a lot of times relationships fall apart. So the divorce rate when men lose their jobs is significantly higher than when women do. So that's because men lose who they are, their purpose, right? And so I wrote this book, and it's a culmination of all my knowledge, some research and science and experience, and my own personal stories of how I grew up and the lessons that I learned from other men and the challenges that I saw other men face, as well as myself. So I put this all in this book, and it's basically a manual to help men perform better, achieve more, and be more fulfilled in all areas of their life. Because that's essentially it. It's not about having one thing and sacrificing something else and suffering in another area, because I see that as a very common approach for men.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a common belief that I'll have to suffer in some aspect or sacrifice. Yes, we all have to sacrifice to a certain degree. But when sacrifice becomes suffering, that's a bigger challenge, because there's this whole concept of misunderstanding of Buddhism, for example, which is a very common philosophy, a way of living when it comes to suffering, right? And they've made it that, suffering is a normal part of life, and suffering is, everything that we everybody goes through. No, it doesn't need to be. That was the whole point. We create our own suffering. We don't need to do that. And so men, we have this innate part of us that believes that we need to suffer to be able to get through something. And short-term suffering is okay, right?
Yeah.
It might toughen us up, but long-term suffering is not. So this is, and I dispel some myths in there as well. And so that was my purpose in the book. And we've gotten great feedback. We've gotten a lot of feedback from men, but even more from women, because we've had a lot of women read the book. And it was fascinating to understand that, and to understand what part of the book resonated, or what parts of the book resonated with a general population, but also with specific individuals. Because I didn't realize that. One of our most popular, the feedback that we get is on the chapter on addictions. Because even within the last 5 years, I've realized how many men are addicted to certain substances or things that are unhealthy for them, essentially.
Right.
So that's my goal, my mission, to help men, because when men are stronger as business leaders and as husbands and as fathers, we have stronger societies, we have stronger families, right? Without a shadow of a doubt. That's one of the reasons that we're seeing such turmoil in the political system these days, is because we don't have as many strong men that we need to. And
I agree with you. We got 5-year-olds up there.
Yeah,
trying to run this country.
Yeah, it's what I call the term is, we need to have mindful alpha males. And there's nothing wrong with being an alpha male, because being an alpha male means you're creating your destiny. But you have to be mindful of the approach, mindful of the impact, not only for this time, but for generations to come. So I talk about the journey of the complete man, which is a never-ending journey, and the core concepts, which is really about when we start to shift within ourselves, the world around us shifts. That's essentially, and even neuroscience has proven that now. Neuroscientists have come out and said our environment is a direct reflection of our internal state.
I agree.
So, and this is the challenge that most men face, is that what they do is, when they're having a challenging time or they want to change something, they try to change their environment first. And that works to a certain degree.
That's been our programming. I mean, even in women, we've been programmed to always go outside of ourselves, instead of looking in. It's always outwards.
Yep. Yeah. And so this is the one thing that we need to pay attention, because once we shift the inside, then the environment starts to shift. And sometimes it doesn't shift to the point where we want it to shift. And that's okay. That means that perhaps we need to do more inner work, or perhaps that environment isn't conducive for us. Because I see, especially in relationships, because this is very important for men. And I even had struggles in my relationship as well with my wife, where we are taught that and there's this common misconception out there right now that, hey, if you change yourself, your relationship is going to get better and change. To a certain degree, yes. But you require two healthy people that are growing at roughly a similar rate, right? That want similar things in life, have similar goals and similar values.
Yeah.
And if you change yourself, that doesn't mean that your spouse is going to change their values or change their goals. So at that point in time, you might have to make a decision to say, is this still the right person for me?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that can be a challenge for many people. So these are all different parts of life, right? And that I talk about in the book.
Yeah, no, and I could so relate to all of that because, with my husband and I, when we met, he's like, I want a woman that has a growth mentality, and I was like, sure, and I'm like, I don't even know what the hell that means, but it sounds great. Let's do it, And it's like it's been a journey, and one of the things that I found that I actually loved so much from the beginning was that he's like, I want to move away from Florida. I want to go to the mountains. I don't know where, but I just want to, go to the mountain. I said, you know what? Yes, please, let's get the hell out of Florida, because I felt that for some reason I couldn't heal in the place that I went through so much pain and so much suffering and so much traumas. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I felt like I needed to distance myself from all that so I can focus on me a little more. And it was challenging, even moving away. There still are, we had so many challenges through our relationship because I was raised very much in my masculine energy. So when you talk about men, I can relate as a man because I was always that, I have to be the strong one. I got to be the provider, my career, like
Yep.
all of it, and it was so hard because when I had to start shifting and to the feminine energy and learning what that was, and then kind of balancing both, it was a huge challenge, but I was able to now look back and understand him more of
Yes.
his
Yeah.
own challenges, and learn that, oh shoot, wait a second, I don't always have to be in my masculine, let him do his part. I want
Yep.
to do my part. I don't want to feel like I got to be both masculine and feminine.
Yep.
I have
Yep.
to handle everything. You know what I mean? Because I was a control freak. Like, even with my business, I had to do everything because if not, shit, it's not going to get done right. Because I felt like people were slacking and all these things because of my growing up mentality. My grandfather was a very strong man. He was a contractor. He never asked for help. He was always independent. And, yes, he would get helpers, obviously to do work. But at the end of the day, everything was on him. He
Yep.
had to be the
Yeah.
provider. He had to be the strong one. You couldn't see him cry. It was that old school, machista,
Yeah.
I gotta, and I get that. I could so understand what you're talking about with the whole man thing. And I'm just like, man, like, I'm so glad that I'm learning to be more my feminine
Yeah.
now and
Yeah. That's
having both
good.
balances.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to actually see if maybe I could get your book and then in the future do another podcast and get very specific, very deep into that book. Because I think it's going to be a really good podcast. People are going to be able to relate. Not that they cannot relate to this one, because we've had some really great topics here, but I'm very interested in your book. And I think that's one of the things that I'm going to be gifting out this year.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. My pleasure.
Yeah, I'll have people like send me their books. I got tons of like authors that send me their books, and then I read
Yep.
it before the podcast. And then I really connect to them. It's something that I started doing not long ago, and I felt like such a deep connection when I actually get on the podcast and
Book.
an
Yeah.
interview. So I know that we've connected great. So on our next one, it's going to be even more
Yeah.
like
Yeah. More than happy to do that.
amazing.
That'd be awesome.
That's awesome. Cool. So I know you have to almost get going, and I had like 20 questions set up, and I think I've only asked like two of them, but it's been
Yeah.
amazing so far. Let me see. What advice would you give to someone that is struggling with like self-doubt or imposter syndrome in their
Mm.
career or in their own lives?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So first of all, give yourself a little bit of credit because this is one of the most common things. Imposter syndrome is the most common thing that impacts most people's professions. So you're not the
Mhm.
only one. But chances
Yeah.
are that if you're in a group of people and there's 10 people around in the table, there's probably 8 out of 10 that have imposter syndrome. So just
Mm.
feel like you're okay. But imposter syndrome, so how do you actually fix that? Number one, you got to have complete clarity over what you want. Okay, so clarity is very important. If you don't have clarity, you're going to feel like an imposter anyways because you're going to be doing circles. Secondly, to overcome imposter syndrome, the number one thing is you have to have self-confidence, right? And self-confidence
Mm.
is built through a number of different things. One is to have competence in something. So you have to up your skill in a particular area, right? But that in itself is not enough. Another thing is basically self-confidence really comes down to how you speak to yourself, right? So what is the self-talk that you have? And if you have effective self-talk, then you're going to have more self-confidence.
Right.
You're going to reduce your level of imposter syndrome. So that's one way. Now, another way to actually increase or to reduce your imposter syndrome is to look for other people that have been in your situation that have already been there and done that. So basically, they've been in your situation, they've had success, because that's going to give you more confidence. Another way is because I'm giving you very specific mechanisms that you can use to improve your confidence to help you reduce your imposter syndrome. So these are the psychological methods. The other way is to break things down and have small wins, right? So
Okay.
really start to get this traction of small wins and start to write them down, because it's easy for us to forget about these wins. And we might have 20 wins, but we might only remember one of them.
Yeah.
And so we have to remind ourselves, because our minds can be our biggest critics. And then the other thing is to have a great support network. And that's ultimately it. Because typically when we have imposter syndrome, we don't feel like telling anybody because we don't want anybody else to know that we feel this way.
Right.
But if you have friends or family members or trusted people, colleagues that you can talk to about this and get support from, that's another element to help you overcome this imposter syndrome part. So those are just some practical things that people can do to overcome this. And the best thing that someone can do is really tackle the challenge and face the challenge, right? So whatever it is that's causing the imposter syndrome is to actually work through it rather than avoid it and worry about it, because there's a difference here. And this isn't my saying, but I think it's very profound. You can spend time either worrying about something, which is imposter syndrome, or you can spend time upping your skill set in that particular area. So trade your worry time for your growth time, or the vice versa, right? You want to do less worrying and more growth. So if you're going to spend 10 minutes worrying, just say, maybe I'll worry for 5 minutes and let me spend the other 5 minutes actually growing my skill set.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. So we're at the end of our show, and I asked 3 closing questions, and they're pretty specific to the individual. So my first question is, reflecting on your journey and the lives you've impacted, what legacy do you hope to leave both personally and through your work with men?
Well, so for my work with men, I hope that I've been able to help people really be better husbands and fathers, and that it helps them throughout their family, just raising healthier family in a healthy community. That's essentially it from that perspective. My personal legacy is essentially to raise 2 healthy children. That's my personal legacy. So if I can raise 2 healthy kids that can then be happy themselves and be positive contributors to society, that's my personal legacy. I don't need to leave millions of dollars or have statues of myself or whatever it might be, charities. It's very basic. I just want to have 2 healthy kids and just have an impact on men being able to raise healthier families.
That's beautiful. And if you could go back and give advice to your younger self at the beginning of your career, what wisdom will you share with him?
Well, I think everything, this is a tough one, because if I gave myself some advice, would I change my path? Right. And that is ultimately something that I wouldn't do, because I'm here for a reason. So everything that has come my way, good and bad, has shifted me into this point. There's been so many things in my life that if there's just crappy things that if I didn't go through them, I wouldn't have the skill set. So I don't even know what advice I'd give myself aside from, it will be okay. It's all for a reason. And those would be the only 2 that I would give myself.
That's awesome. I love that. For listeners inspired to make a change but unsure where to start, what is one small, powerful action they can take today to begin their journey towards self-mastery and fulfillment?
Okay, so this is, for me, it all comes back to clarity, because it is very difficult to go on a path when you're not clear what that path is. And I'm not saying know exactly perfectly what that path is, but have some kind of direction. And so that is the first thing to take a look at. So if someone is not happy with their life, then sitting down and saying, okay, what are what are some aspects that I want to change in my life? Like, if I'm not happy, what do I want to change? Or what kind of life do I want to have? Because even that question, what kind of life do I want to have, is tough for a lot of people because they haven't been able to really put themselves in that state, that mindset, because they might have so many challenging things that are happening in their
Right.
mind, right? So it is a tougher thing than we think to get clarity. But once we get clarity, it's much easier. So,
Yeah.
not that we're not going to have challenges, but the bigger challenges, I would say, for most people is getting clarity. Because if you don't have clarity, what ends up happening is you start, let's just say you take 3 steps forward, 2 steps back,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it takes you more energy, time, and resources to get to where you want to be because you're going sideways rather than relatively going straight. It's never going to be perfect straight, but
Right.
it's easier to get to a direction when you know what that direction is rather than, trying to find a path that is just all over the place.
Mm, beautiful. I love that. Now, where can people find you?
Well, the simplest way is you can go to my website, which is purdeepsangha.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My profile, I'm most active on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me and send me a message that you've listened to this podcast, and then more than happy to connect and converse if you want to chat.
Awesome. And as we wrap up today's episode of the Dear Soul podcast, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our guest for sharing his insights and experiences. If you found value in our conversation, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your friends. Your support helps us continue bringing inspiring guests to the show, and together we can inspire more souls on their journey to healing and growth. Stay connected with us for more informative stories. Thank you so much for your time. And
Yeah,
I am so grateful for all the work that you're doing for this, for humanity. And I had a great time in this conversation in our interview.
yeah. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for having me, and I love your energy, by the way. So this for me was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. No, you're welcome.